Please welcome to the stage Gegham Mughnetsyan, Chechen archivist at the USC Institute of Armenian Studies, who will introduce Dr. Stephan Astourian.
In 1987, a year before the Karabakh movement started, then UCLA doctoral student Stephan Astourian published a book review in the Armenian Review in which he astutely underscored the lack of Western scholarship on the interethnic issues within Azerbaijan and the Caucasian region of the then Soviet Union. Astourian would go on to do his part in filling that gap in scholarship on Armenian-Azerbaijani issues. And he did it in real time with groundbreaking articles already published by 1994 about the Karabakh conflict and the rise of post-Soviet nationalisms, such as the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, dimensions, lessons, and prospects, and In Search of Their Forefathers, National Identity and the Historiography and Politics of Armenian-Azerbaijani Ethnogenesis. Those would be followed by the analysis on state, homeland, and diaspora in the Armenian and Azerbaijani cases. Having earned his PhD from UCLA at a crucial time after Armenia's independence and the First Karabakh War, Dr. Astourian's scholarship focused on contemporary Armenian history, a period that has been the concentration of our work here at the Institute since our founding nearly 20 years ago. After the end of the First Karabakh War in 1994, Armenian scholarship treated this seismic chapter of modern Armenian history either through the false security of victor's perspective or with extreme caution out of fear of inadvertently becoming a tool for Azerbaijani revisionists who wanted to mold the past of the region in their own image. Dr. Astourian never shied away from the realities of the recent past. As the longtime professor of Armenian history at Berkeley, he taught his crucial contemporary period to generations of students and continued to produce influential articles dealing with the subject. His paper, From Ter-Petrosyan to Kocharian, Leadership Change in Armenia, published in 2000, stands out as the seminal analysis of that first decade of Armenian independence and the central role the Karabakh conflict and its aftermath had on Armenian state building. In 2012, as a senior at Berkeley, majoring in peace and conflict studies, I decided to write my honors thesis on US foreign policy toward Nagorno-Karabakh, and how fortunate I was to have the guidance and mentorship of Professor Astourian at a time when resources on Karabakh were scarce and not readily available. All the materials I put together for that thesis, including a complete bibliography of sources on the conflict, guided by Professor Astourian, would years later become the basis for the Institute's Focus on Karabakh portal, which provided academic resources and analysis of the conflict. In April of 2016, when the four-day war broke out, the portal became essential as the world started looking for intelligible materials on this often overlooked corner of the world. Having retired from Berkeley in 2022, Dr. Astourian has not stepped away from his academic endeavors. Now, as the new director of the Tarpanjan Center for Policy Analysis at the American University of Armenia, he continues to study and explore this latest stage of contemporary Armenian history with the upheavals following the 2020 war and the dissolution of Artsakh in 2023. And with that, please join me in welcoming to stage Dr. Stephan Astourian to deliver his sobering lecture titled The Long Road to Catastrophe.
Well, I would like first to thank Dr. Shushan Karabedian and the organizers of this conference for inviting me. Second, it's a long talk. I have really to try to be very concise because we'll be covering about 30 years of history, and I would like to make the following statement. The late president, the French president, François Mitterrand, is known as having said that one must give time to time. Had I given this talk, let's say, in 2014, of course, Artsakh wasn't uprooted then, some of my views about the Artsakh conflict would have been different, which goes to show that historians are right. You need to have distance from the facts and access to the sources. I believe we still don't have enough distance to be really thorough and accurate. This having been said, let's attack. The 2020 catastrophic defeat led to a bitter game between the opposition, led by former President Kocharyan and Sarkisyan, and the current regime of Prime Minister Pashinyan. The main issue was who is responsible for this defeat, and the poverty of the debate, assuming it was a debate, it was striking. Some said it's only Mr. Pashinyan. The current government put the blame only on the previous leaders, and thus none of the deeper causes for the catastrophe were really analyzed in any way. One thing should be clear, catastrophic military defeats are likely to have multiple deep causes, and let's take a look at some of them. At a very basic level, the power of a country in relation to another can be assessed on the basis of a few parameters: population size, territorial size, wealth, that is the nature, size of the economy, military strength, state capacity, ability to deliver projects, to realize projects, and so on. On each of those parameters, Armenia was inferior to or weaker than Azerbaijan. Just one example, Azerbaijan saw its gross domestic product grow 45-fold between 1995 and 2022. During the same period, its military budget expanded 29-folds. Armenia, on the other hand, saw its GDP increase 15-folds since 1995, and its military budget 13-fold. In the early 1990s, both countries were approximately at the same level, so they were comparable. Second point, in Armenia, the emergence of a post-Soviet neo-colonial state dominated by what needs to be called, as it used to be in Marxist literature, a kind of special type of comprador elite. My sense is that none of the three first presidents of Armenia had any real deep faith in the ability of Armenia to be independent, except perhaps during the first 2 years of the 1990s. Actually, the whole process of handing over the security of Armenia and other things to Russia started with President Levon Ter-Bedrosian, the Russian military base in Gyumri, the strategic partnership treaty with the Russian Federation, both between 1995 and 1997. Naturally, 10 years before the expiration of the bilateral defense treaty, President Serge Sarkisyan agreed to extend it through 2044. And to add a nice touch to the whole thing, in 2016, the air defenses of Armenia also were pretty much handed over to Russia. There is a principle, very basic principle in the realist theory of international relations, that this is a self-help society. That is, you don't rely on anybody when it comes to your survival. You know, it's a very basic idea. What about state building? It was essentially, it is difficult to notice any real effort at building a state apparatus based on legal rational norms selected through merit and competence. Fourth point, the emergence and structuration of a kleptocratic, semi-authoritarian regime. It started with the process of privatization in the 1990s under Mr. Derbedrosian, but it was perfected, actually structured, under President Kocharyan in the early 2000s. Armenia was governed approximately like Sicily under the mafia. That is, each area had a kind of boss, sub-boss, the city, the region, and everything went upward to the central administration and the president. This was not exactly a system conducive to real economic growth, and whatever economic growth was registered came from buildings, such as the famous Northern Avenue, an area from which hundreds of poor families or medium families were driven away to build those buildings and make money. When the economic crisis of 2018 came, the economy of Armenia was one of the worst in the world. I think it's dipped about 16 or 17%. I don't remember. There was essentially no development of anything really productive. And in addition to that, the crucial intellectual and technological infrastructure of Armenia was elegantly transferred to Russia by Mr. Kocharyan in November 2002 with the so-called against $98 million minuscule debt. Armenia gave to Russia the Rastan thermal power plant, the largest in the country, the Mars electronic plant in Yerevan, crucial one, 3 research and production enterprises for mathematical machines, for the study of materials, for automated control systems, and so on. These were advanced former military industrial plants of the Soviet Union. All of these for $98 million, and I found even one source stating that just the value of the Mars electronic plant was estimated at 200 million or more at that time. I cannot corroborate the accuracy of these estimates independently. What did this type of regime lead to? An economy lacking any significant production capacity, outside mining, which was privatized in obscure conditions and certainly corrupt conditions. The economy led to high level of poverty, massive emigration, estimated, I believe, by the UNDP to stand around 1.3 to 1.4 million Armenians from the early 1990s to 2018. Even worse, massive brain drain. 6th point, total dependence as a way of life. The survival of small states often depends on a patron or an alliance. Wise small states do well to hedge their bets a little bit at least. That didn't take place in the case of Armenia. However, it did take place in the case of Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan never fell under the control or full power of any side, either Russia or the West or Turkey. It hedged its bets. Armenians chose to make their country dependent on one foreign power, perhaps for understandable reasons from their perspective, if we take into account their culture, you know, their background. And then they started claiming that they were developing a sophisticated, I am quoting, complementary foreign policy, or second version, multi-vector foreign policy. This was combined with a system that basically diplomatic system overall based on amateurism. That's my 7th point. You will be surprised if you look at the details to see how many irrelevant people were appointed to diplomatic positions under Kocharyan and Serge Sarkisyan. People such as businessmen, friends, sportsmen, and so on, became ambassadors or consul generals, in particular in very nice places or places where you could invest money and do business. I can give you some specific examples. In a nutshell, the diplomatic service, with some decent exceptions, was essentially not exactly outstanding. What is perhaps even worse is that, to my knowledge, no formal analytical database process of decision-making in international relations was ever developed. Decision-making seems to have been individual or to have resulted from discussions among a handful of individuals close to the leader. No scenario building based on data, analysis of long-term risks, and so on. This was how things had been run for decades. Thus, one of the results of this situation is that something that was obvious even for people who are not diplomats or might be academics and so on, that the change in the policy of the Russian Federation in relation to Azerbaijan and Turkey, starting especially after 2007, but even more so 2008 and 2009, does not seem to have been taken seriously by the Armenian leadership. 8th point, and very significant one, the only asset Armenia had was its extensive diaspora with a lot of talented people in all kinds of fields. In engineering, subfields of engineering, physics, mathematics, you name it, you got it. You have all the people you might need. Here, one has to be very clear that none of the regimes, starting with Levon Bedrosian and continuing up to now with Mr. Pashinyan, has shown any interest in structuring in a formal way the collaboration between various fields in economics, this, that, subfields of engineering, and so on, between the diaspora and Armenia. Close to 7 or 8 diaspora conferences were organized over the years that essentially resulted in nothing except in a kind of fiesta for diaspora notables who go there. A few of them have 2 minutes to say something, have a picture, a nice dinner in the plain of Ararat. Hopefully you can see the mountain also that day. The Gatorigos is somewhere. Beautiful. And if you need it, you will also get a medal, you know, before returning home, and that's it. If anybody can show me one clear achievement coming out of those conferences, I am totally open and I'll apologize publicly to all of you. To sum up, decades were wasted while Azerbaijan benefited from the production of its energy, hydrocarbon resources, starting with the famous so-called contract of the century in 1994. It was September 1994. not even 6 months after something I will mention in a few minutes, the eternal ceasefire regarding the Artsakh conflict, signed in May 1994. Now that contract of the century involved 11 of the largest hydrocarbon companies in the world. I mean, you have really all kinds of countries involved. It goes from Great Britain to the US, all of them. ExxonMobil, Chevron, you name it, you got it. BP. So you can imagine that those companies have influence in the countries where they are located. In a nutshell, if I may sum up things, the closer you come to the present from 1994 on, the lower were your chances of being able to find some kind of settlement to the Karabakh conflict, because there was a vast differential in the economic wealth of the two sides over the years. Every single year it gets larger and larger. It reached even a point around the early 2010s that just the military budget of Azerbaijan exceeded the national budget of Armenia. Okay? You can check those things. All of these, why did I mention all of these? You will say he's not talking about Karabakh. Well, no. If you deal with deep causes, you have to realize that you develop a foreign policy based on your muscles, on your strengths. Maybe a little bit above your muscle size, but you look at reality, you look at data, and you draw conclusions from data. The data are quite clear. Second part of the talk, the Mountainous Karabakh conflict itself, or the Artsakh conflict. A cursory look at the evolution of the Artsakh issue reveals that the first stage was the Karabakh so-called movement in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And it gathered momentum on the basis of essentially two ideas, one of which was union. Miatsum, Miatsum, people were chanting that. The second one was independence, but Miatsum was the idea. We don't have time to delve into details and to go into nuances because it is possible to argue things, but one thing should be absolutely clear to you. There was no Miatsum or union, and when Karabakh proclaimed independence, thereafter that independence was not even recognized by Armenia. So you see the difference between the initial position and the way things evolved afterwards. Instead, some bizarre ideas were propagated to the effect that maybe Uruguay is going to recognize the independence of Karabakh or some other Latin American country, and thereafter Armenia might do so itself. Second point, the war ended with the so-called ceasefire signed in Bishkek, if I am not wrong, naturally under Russian supervision. Apparently it was a kind of eternal ceasefire, and there is nothing eternal, not even victory or anything like that in international relations. And you can compare the attitude of President Aliyev these days with that eternal ceasefire signed at that time. President Aliyev is pressing for more and more and more and more, and postponing the signing of a peace treaty by using all kinds of arguments. At any rate, as a colleague of mine and a French Armenian, in addition, mentioned in a recent article, 1994 was probably the best time to try to settle this issue on the basis of a position of strength. That is, Armenia had taken over, had won a very clear victory, and it might have been, might is the word, have been the right time to try to resolve the issue. At any rate, the third point is the evolution of the Karabakh negotiations. In 96-97, a so-called package deal with the Republic of Mountainous Karabakh becoming some kind of autonomous territorial entity within the Republic of Azerbaijan. President Levon Bedrosian seems to have been favorable to this arrangement. Again, we do not have all the primary documents, so one has to be cautious here. Okay, and I like primary documents. Then we move to the summer-winter 97, the step-by-step approach as opposed to the so-called patetain approach, package deal, which foreshadowed the future Madrid principles of 2007. In a nutshell, return of mountainous Karabakh surrounding territories, deployment of peacekeepers, return of those territories except Lachin, some security guarantees for the Armenian population, and final determination of Karabakh's legal status through negotiations. Naturally, the last point from a realist perspective tended to look a bit optimistic in the long term. When you have returned everything, you know, waiting for the status might be a bit optimistic. 1998 Common State Proposal. This meant horizontal relations between Stepanakert and Baku within one state, Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan rejected this position, and we were already a little bit far from the idea of total independence here. Finally came the Madrid Principles in 2000, the Key West negotiation in 2001, which I will skip over, where the idea of corridor was developed about the region of Mehri. It is a comeback kid now with the so-called Zangezur corridor. The Madrid Principles essentially were the same step-by-step approach to the Karabakh issue. It was rejected mainly by Mr. Robert Kocharian, Serge Sarkisian, who had been brought to serve in Armenia, and also the late Vasken Sarkisian. This led to some kind of a soft coup d'etat or palace coup, and President Bedrosian was forced to resign in early 98. The Madrid Principle again suggested that you return the territories, refugees return. The talk is about Azerbaijani refugees return to Karabakh. So far as I can tell, all along these years, Armenia doesn't seem to have put on the negotiating table the issue of the hundreds of thousands of Armenians forcibly ethnically cleansed from Azerbaijan. Sumgait, Kirovabad, Baku, people massacred, defenestrated, mutilated, driven out of there. I couldn't find a moment when I can see that Armenia is putting that on the table, negotiating table, whereas Azerbaijan from day one raised the issue of its refugees from Artsakh and elsewhere. So the whole thing was, again, with the Madrid Principle, relegated to a final expression of will once the territories were returned and so on. The final stage for me is the Kazan Plan of 2011, mediated by President Dmitry Medvedev. It was a variation on the Madrid Principles. The Kelbajar and Lachin regions accept a corridor to Armenia being returned after the determination of the legal status of mountainous Karabakh through a referendum. Armenia apparently was willing to sign. President Ilham Aliyev gave indications that he was willing, but then he said a big no to that one. There was no major development, so far as I am concerned, substantive in the negotiations afterwards. The key moment for me was the so-called Lavrov plan, when our ally Russia, its foreign minister, who is partly Armenian, came up with a plan, modified Kazan document. It envisioned the return of territories, the last two territories afterwards. There was no reference to a future referendum, however, and the security of the population of Artsakh was to be maintained by Russian peacekeepers. These essentially foreshadowed what happened after the 2020 war, and Russian peacekeepers were also supposed to secure the Lachin corridor, of course. The plan was rejected by President Serge Sarkisyan in the fall of 2016, but it should have at the very least raised massive concerns. When your only real ally is developing such a plan, you should be a little bit concerned. In addition, from 2009 to 2014, Russia had sold $4 billion in armaments to Azerbaijan, about 85% of all Azerbaijani military procurements during those years. And it continued selling armaments to the level of 32 to 35% every year thereafter. In Armenia, the reaction, I remember it very vividly on the part of the acolytes of the regime, was, it's only business, there is nothing to worry about. I can give you data about the military expenses thereafter, and you'll see that Armenia was outmatched 5 to 6 times. The end. The 2016 four-day war should have raised even more alarms, because things became clear that there was a real imbalance and a new type of warfare was being tested. Territories were lost, not massively, and President Serge Sarkisyan referred to them as Anbet Khorer, useless territories. You know, it was no major loss. But in the summer of 2016, he went to Nagorno-Karabakh, gathered all the parties, and suggested it was high time to settle the issue through concessions. All the parties, governmental and opposition, parliamentary and others, rejected this position. 2018 came the so-called Velvet Revolution, which wasn't a revolution at all. There is nothing velvet in revolutions, believe me. Bolshevik Revolution, French Revolution, Chinese Revolution, not velvet. Inexperienced people came to power. From day one, they were accused of selling Karabakh, and any concession on their part would have basically corroborated that they were traitors. Thus, the Prime Minister saw fit to state that Karabakh is Armenia and period, which basically undermined all the negotiation principles of the previous decades. So internationally, it's a big gaffe. You are saying I don't care about all the previous negotiations. The defense minister came up with new ideas that now Armenia had developed an offensive doctrine, and new war would mean new territories. This is literally surrealistic when we know what happened afterwards. It is unclear what data and what reasoning supported such self-confident statements. Grandiosity, bluff, megalomania, total incompetence, it's unclear. At any rate, the war unfortunately took place, and we know what happened, and that's why we are here. When war came, there was total disorganization. The best example I can give is the total failure of general mobilization in Armenia. Why? It's unclear. It is hard to understand the blindness of Armenian authorities in view of the visible imbalance in power, but the best way of understanding it, in my mind, at least at this point, is that over the years, especially after 97 and then the following palace coup, dislodging President Levon Bedrosian, Artsakh became a topic for internal politics in Armenia. It was used. Okay, we are looting the country, but Artsakh is safe under our leadership. At the same time, a whole rhetoric, I am done, a whole rhetoric emerged, despiteful towards Azerbaijanis. They don't know how to fight. They are vochkhars, they are nomads, and so on. And as early as Sun Tzu, if you read, you know that you should never underestimate your enemy. In conclusion, I would use the title of a scholar I miss and I had a lot of respect for, Leo Cooper. He was the first comparative genocide scholar and of ethnic cleansing. The title of the book is The Pity of It All. Thank you.